Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings of the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 742, Four Trees Upon a Solitary Acre. Now, one of the first things I want to say about this landscape poem, we've seen a number of these, is that this one is widely analyzed by scholars. It is interesting to study what scholars have said about these 1,775 poems contained in the Johnson edition. Some scholars will seem to bypass certain poems that you would think would deserve their attention, and then they would come to poems that you might want to skip over as saying, not that important of a poem, it just talks about four trees in the middle of nowhere standing isolated. And yet scholars will spill a lot of ink about these kinds of poems, and I want to bring that to your attention as we head into each of these poems. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 741 poems. We just finished with 741 Drama's Vitalist Expression. Now, here we have Emily the Skeptic one more time. I mean, there's going to be a lot of resonances in this poem. You will have heard echoes already in our study. Emily's, in some ways, argument with the argument that she was raised with of what we call design. In other words, you're walking along the beach, you see a watch lying there in the sand. This is a very old argument. Emily was raised with this idea. You pick up the watch and immediately you know there must be a watchmaker that could create such a complex object as a watch. If that is true for the watch, then is that also not doubly true for the natural world? Now, the scholar Leiter has pointed out that this poem deals with the poles of certainty, uncertainty, order, disorder, design, and randomness in the natural world. I want you to already note in your volume that there is no singular I speaker in this poem, that the voice is impersonal, and I want you, as the scholar Wendler has commented, I want you to notice that Emily welcomes, it seems, the absence of transcendental intelligibility. In other words, the poem seems to suggest that things are just the way they are, including four trees standing in the middle of nowhere, a solitary acre, she'll call it. Four trees upon a solitary acre, without design or order or apparent action, maintain. The sun upon a morning meets them, the wind no nearer neighbor have they but God. An acre gives them place, they, him, attention of passer-by, of shadow or of squirrel, haply or boy. What deed is theirs unto the general nature, what plan they severally retard, or further unknown. Now, much has been made of the fact that the last word of the poem is the key word of the poem, as in unknown, and the dash which follows it, which seems to suggest that the poem ends with a certain kind of point of wandering, as one scholar has pointed out, or a lack of definitive closure, as another scholar has pointed out. Notice we'll begin with four trees, but Emily, who always seems to have an eye for specificity, will tell us nothing about the trees. What kind of trees are they, for example? They just, we're told, stand solitary in the middle of an acre. Notice there is no human kind of structures around them, which leads to the sense that maybe they weren't actually planted by someone, but rather there they are. Notice it's four and not three or whatever, right? So there's a kind of a gesturing towards just randomness right from the beginning. Notice she'll tell us in the second line, without design. Now again, because of Emily's background, especially her being raised in the evangelical faith of her youth, everything she was told has a design because of God. We'll get to God mentioned one time in the poem, and yet somehow absent from the poem. Four trees upon a solitary acre, without design, notice, or order, or apparent action. Now, the word apparent, I think, is central here as well, because there's no, it's not clear why they're there. Who put them there? No one can figure it out. Then the use of the word maintain. Now, of course, this is the key word of the poem. It is a transitive verb, which requires a direct object, playing a game of being intransitive. In other words, what do these trees maintain? And immediately you go, oh, in other words, she's using the word maintain to just simply mean they are there, they endure, they just stand there. There's no meaning to their being there, they're just there. The tautology comes to mind. It is what it is, they are what they are. Then we've got different kinds of forces of nature that could, in fact, have some connection with them. Notice, the sun, upon a morning, meets them. The wind, no nearer neighbor have they. In other words, they're out in the middle of nowhere. By the way, this use of no nearer can't help but remind me of T.S. Eliot's Hollow Man. Let me be no nearer in Death's dream kingdom. Let me also wear such deliberate disguises. Rat's coat, crow's games, cross stays in a field behaving as the wind behaves no nearer. I think this is a poem that probably T.S. Eliot did read. And this use of the idea of no nearer neighbor have they, but God. In other words, they're out there in the middle of nowhere. There doesn't seem to be any purpose for these four trees. They're just there. Then, the acre gives them place. Notice the use of the dash to set off the word place. Him. Now, some have pointed out that him could be, in fact, the mentioning of God. We were with God in the previous stanza. You'll remember 127 poems we said will mention God. Him, attention of passerby. In other words, maybe somebody sees them, a shadow, obviously, as the sun is setting, or a squirrel, happily, or a boy. In other words, all of these, notice, they're unimportant in the larger world, as one scholar has pointed out. There is nothing important about these trees, and no one of importance will ever notice them, other than, obviously, whoever the speaker of this poem is, not identified as Emily with the I. Then, to finish, we have questions with our question marks, or observations that are rhetorical in nature. What deed is theirs? We can't help but think about the opening lines of Goethe's Faust. In the beginning was the deed, in the beginning was the word, and the deed. And we've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. What deed is theirs? The point of them, their importance, under the general nature, we might call this Emily's attempt to talk about God's plan. What plan? They severally retard, or further unknown. By the way, her use of the word retard we'll see one other time in 14:13, and it will read like this. We'll come back to it. Sweet skepticism of the heart that knows and does not know. I've got to read it again. It's an amazing line. We'll enjoy. We'll come back to this poem when we read this poem, 14:13. Sweet skepticism of the heart that knows and does not know, and tosses like a fleet of balm affronted by the snow, invites and then retards the truth, lest certainty be sire, compared with the delicious throe of transport thrilled with fear. This idea, in other words, that there isn't anything that in one way or another stops, retards, or furthers them. It is, if you will, completely unknown. Of course, the word is could sit before the word unknown. Now, in some ways, this poem will remind us of that silence, that distance, when we hit poem 632. The brain is wider than the sky. For put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea. For hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God. For heft them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do, as syllable from sound. This juxtaposition between the seeing something and then experiencing it in the mind's eye, if you will. Now, again, there is the question of what is the point of all of this? And I think at 2a, I think the argument that Emily's making is that all human knowledge is somehow limited or unknown. We don't really always know exactly why things are the way they are. Some have read this as a theodicy, the question of why must there be pain and suffering in the world, and to what degree can we explain it? Is there an actual plan? At 2b, one scholar has commented that this poem is rhythmically experimental, and another has commented that the poem has no syntactic design. It isn't clear. What is the point that's being made? She says, there's four trees standing in the middle of nowhere, and no one knows exactly why. Okay, but what's your real point? Well, it's all unknown, see, and that last word of the poem leads us to say Emily is making a very powerful skeptical observation here about what we can know and what we can't know epistemologically, or even ontologically for that matter. At 3a, well, of course, we mentioned 632 and especially 1413. We'll come back to it. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this. What are your thoughts about this? Is there design in the world, or is it completely random? Where do you come down on that one? I hope Emily's challenging you philosophically. Thank you.